it's time for us to begin. I'm Stephanie Smallwood. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a faculty member here at the UW in the History Department and in the Comparative History of Ideas Department that we otherwise on campus refer to as CHID. But the reason I'm standing at this podium tonight is that I'm also very proud to be the director of the University Honors Program. And I am so excited to welcome you all to the 9th Annual Honors Program Global Challenges Interdisciplinary Answers Showcase. I believe it is important that we begin by recognizing that we are gathered here this evening on native lands, that it is the Coast Salish peoples who belong to these lands, washed by the waters of the Salish Sea, and that as the beneficiaries of the ongoing settler colonization of these lands, we have an obligation to not only acknowledge Indigenous presence, but to enact such recognition with thoughtful intentionality. The intention to ask questions that make us uncomfortable, the intention to build relationships with Coast Salish peoples and Washington State Indian tribes more broadly that nurture their well-being and support the redress of past and ongoing harms to their communities in which we are complicit. We've been reflecting on these obligations in the Honors Program Office as part of our preparations for tonight's gathering, and we are putting serious thought and planning into how we will do the work to begin to establish those relationships and do so in a respectful way. And I hope to have more to share about that in upcoming events, and certainly as we gather again for Global Challenges next year. I want to issue some thank yous. I'm very grateful for the honors donors and volunteers who make events like this possible. And I also want to recognize our Dean of Undergraduate Academic Affairs and UW Vice Provost, Ed Taylor, and thank him for his steadfast support of UW Honors. Ed, would you raise your hand so you see who you are? We will hear from Ed. You'll be happy to know you're going to hear from Ed later on. He's going to close the program out. I want the Honors Program staff to know how deeply grateful I am for the countless hours of thought and planning they put into this program every year. And most importantly, I want to thank you, our audience. We are so proud to host you all, and your choice to be here tonight, a rainy, cold night, is a reminder of why we do what we do and who it's for. Now I want to say a few things about our focus for this evening. Instead of choosing a specific global challenge that honors students are thinking about, like climate change or unequal access to healthcare, this year we decided to widen the scope with the very big theme, ways of knowing. Our goal with this theme is to shine a bright light on the interdisciplinary inquiry that is the core of the honors education students come to UW Honors for when they enter our program as first or second year students. We have assembled a fantastic panel of speakers who are excited to dive into a conversation that will help us reflect on the variety of ways we produce knowledge and think seriously about the different ways of knowing we need to value and draw on to address the many global challenges we face today. And now, I'm going to briefly introduce our moderator and then pass things over to her so we can get the conversation started. Samantha-Lynn Martinez is an honors student pursuing a double major in marine biology and ecology, evolution, and conservation biology. And most important for our time together this evening, Samantha-Lynn is one of our fantastic honors peer educators. And I know she's really excited to be in conversation with our faculty speakers and bring the perspectives and interests of honors students to the table with the speakers tonight. And I think Samantha-Lynn has a bit of a contingent of people who know and are here and support her. Who's here for Samantha-Lynn tonight? Of course, course, I also have to boost that among her many talents is graphic arts. She designed our swag t-shirt, and she designed the wonderful advertising graphics that we have for the event.
Thank you. It is so lovely to see everyone here. Thank you all so much for showing up to Global Challenges this year. I know it's dark, it's rainy, daylight savings has thrown me in for a loop, and I think all of us can agree on that. But I'm so delighted to see so many wonderful faces out here tonight. But yeah, as Stephanie has given me such a lovely introduction, thank you so much, Stephanie. I am a peer educator in the honors program, and there are so many different parts of my academic journey that have gone through honors, and it's truly invited me to explore how I can integrate all of my interests into my academic journey. So I'm a biologist by trade, but I love communicating science and engaging with the public, so I think it's going to be a really lovely time sitting down with our amazing speakers who will introduce themselves in just a second. But to give you all a little bit of background and format for the rest of this talk tonight, all of you filled out an RSVP form, and many of you have mentioned questions that are burning, and you want to get some answers to those tonight, and we have synthesized all of those, and we'll even have a Q&A session later tonight as we navigate through our synthesized prompts from earlier on, and we'll have a really nice conversation ahead of us. So I'm very excited for what we have ahead, and I'm going to go ahead and let our wonderful speakers introduce themselves. And please turn up to me.
Thank you, Samantha-Lynn. Good evening, everybody. My name is Tony Lucero. I teach here in the Comparative History of Ideas department and also the Jackson School of International Studies. I grew up on the border, Ciudad Juarez, Chihuahua, and El Paso, Texas. Just by way of introduction, I want to say that those lands are also the Rarámuri lands, the lands of the Tigua people. They're also Apache lands. But for me, as someone who went to public school in Texas, those facts were never mentioned to us. We were never taught that. And I'm a scholar of Indigenous politics in the Americas, and one of the things that I just want to start by saying is that much of my work as an educator is really reckoning with my deeply colonial education, and also just signaling how much I had to unlearn myself, and helping students kind of think about that. So unlearning is just one of the things that kind of comes to mind as we start this conversation.
Hi everyone, my name is Katie Davis. I'm an associate professor in the Information School here at UW, and I'm in my 12th year. I can't believe it. We're just talking about how fast time goes. But I actually started my professional career as an elementary school teacher. I always wanted to be a teacher, but I also wanted to be a writer, and I wanted to think about what was going on in my classroom, and I found that, as it turns out, as an elementary school teacher, you don't have a lot of space to actually think, and no time to write or really do anything. So I actually left the elementary school classroom, and I went to a bigger classroom, the university, just to create some space to reflect a little bit more, because I do really enjoy engaging with this question of how do we know what we know, and I love this topic for tonight. But usually, in my research, I focus on technology's role in young people's lives. I do a lot of studying, what are young people doing with technology, and then because I'm in an information school surrounded by computer scientists, I also do a lot of work designing new technology experiences. And as part of that, and particularly with my roots in education and my training in education, I spend a lot of time thinking about how new technologies are introduced into learning settings, often with the promise of democratizing education and providing access to those who haven't necessarily had access before. And they often are introduced with this really amazing opportunities and great potential. And unfortunately, often what they end up doing is reinscribing existing inequalities. And in my work, I'm trying to understand why is that, how does it happen, and how can we disrupt that? And I think we might get into aspects of generative AI in our conversation this evening. And I think that those questions are really front and center for me, at least, when we're talking about ChatGPT and generative AI. So I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Can you hear me? Hello. Polly Olsen. I am a member of Yakima Nation located in South Central Washington State. I'm a University of Washington alumni, and I'm a dog. I'm a true dog. It's in my blood. I've been here for over 25 years as a student and as professional staff. I am the tribal liaison and the director of diversity, equity, access, inclusion, and decolonization at the Burke Museum. And I'm just excited to have a conversation with you. I'm here as a non-traditional academic who serves our communities through a non-traditional learning platform. I trust and believe and love science, but I also have conversations that really push the opportunity to bring other ways of knowing to the table and to the forefront, to also honor our ancestors and the teachings and the cultural practices that have been sleeping for centuries. And how do we bring these conversations back to the table, back to the classroom, back to the environment, because she is such a great teacher. I will pause there, and you should know I'm a storyteller. Can you tell? Nice to see you tonight.
We thank you all so much for giving wonderful introductions of who you are and where you're finding knowledge. And Paul, you gave an amazing introduction and segue into our very first prompt for tonight, because as we know, American and Western society, it highly values the use of the university. The university is very integral to our culture and how people gather knowledge. However, we want to challenge that, and we would love to know if there's multiple ways of knowing that can help us think beyond what the university is capable of providing students. Like, for example, I'm very curious about that too. Had I not gone through the university route, and had my friends not gone through the university route, what does that look like? And from the educator perspective, and from where you all are coming from, what are some insights that you may have to challenge the usual notion that universities is integral to Western and American culture?
Polly is the closer. She'll close. Well, maybe I'll just start us off. But I think one of the things that I've really learned so much and appreciated from Polly and colleagues in American Indian Studies. Is that me? Testing 1, 2, 3. So one of the things that I've really learned from many of my Indigenous colleagues, and it's important to know that the history of knowledge production in this place does not begin with the founding of the University of Washington. I mean, that sounds obvious when you say it, but often we don't think about that, and we don't think about how many forms of teaching had already happened since time immemorial here, and so that's a humbling proposition for many of us, and that's just a point that begins to help us decenter what the university is. And don't get me wrong, I mean, I do love the university, but I'm deeply ambivalent about it. Samantha-Lynn is in the class I'm teaching right now on the university, and one of the ways I describe it is it's simultaneously a crime scene and a site of refuge. It can be both of those things. And how we think about what we do in this space really depends on everybody. So recognizing these colonial, I was going to say past, but their presence in many ways. How do we think about that, and how do we find ways to push back in every space that we have available to us? I think is one thing that is really important. And we've done a tremendous amount at the university, and we have a lot more to go. As Polly's tremendous job title suggests, there's a lot of work, but it is, I think it's work that has begun in really important ways. And the Center for American Indigenous Studies here, American Indian Indigenous Studies, is incredible. I mean, I really think right now the University of Washington is one of the best places for thinking about Indigenous studies in the Americas, and that is due to the tremendous scholars that we have here. And they help us live with this very question. So I think maybe I'll just stop there and see what the folks have to say.
So when you're asking Samantha-Lynn about multiple ways of knowing, I love how you say, Tony, decentering. Right now, in this moment, in this quarter, I'm teaching a class on research methods, and I've been teaching it since I arrived in 2012. But the way I teach it is quite different now. And you know, I used to kind of teach it as, here are the methods, and it was very much, you know, the scientific method stands supreme, and I still really do believe that the scientific method is great, and it can lead to a lot of really important insights, but it's not the only way of arriving at knowledge. And I start my class by not even talking about research, just talking about worldviews and our epistemologies, and how we could come into this classroom or this space right now and have very different experiences and interpret things in very different ways. And that is the exact same thing that happens when you research. And I even get the students to think about where do they align themselves? Do they feel like they're more of a post-positivist, or are they a constructivist, or where do they stand? And actually get them to stand up and move around the classroom. And they, you know, they're not often sure where to stand, and that's totally fine because they're still figuring it out. But I try and keep that front and center, that in the university, there are many ways of knowing, and certainly in the past and in the present, some have been favored over others. But I do think that we're doing a lot of good work to try and change that. And you know, just the fact that in this research methods that was taught in such a traditional way when I first arrived, it has changed so much. That gives me a lot of hope.
You said that very well. Thank you. And to add to what my colleagues, my panelists are sharing here, is it is important to speak from a lived experience from the beginning. The lived experience of both how you got there in academia, to as well as the impact we want to have on you as you prepare yourself for your careers and to move into the world. I teach a class called the Yakima Experience, Conservation and Management of Natural Resources for Yakima Nation. And we bring in our elders, we bring in our scientists, we take our U of W students out, and it is through the lived and daily experiences of our Yakima people and how we are really caring for the salmon and the work to protect the water. And as we took the scholars out into community, the love for the resource really impacted the scholars because they smelt the water. We were with the fish at the hatchery, and these human beings were taking on that full responsibility of the unspoken law. It is our responsibility to care for the land, to care for the salmon. So these lived experiences and integrating Western science into the actual cultural practice is an incredible conversation that we've had with a lot of individuals this quarter. But it's also how I approach and feel I have that responsibility as a tribal liaison at the Burke Museum to be able to have the conversations about culture material, natural history material that we have in the museum, and how that past is our future, and how we're going to heal the environment, how we're going to have these difficult conversations and move things forward. So the academia is yes and. Thank you.
Okay. It might just be my microphone. We'll find out. But I can talk loud too if this isn't going to turn on, but that's okay. Thank you all so much for your insights on that prompt. I think as a student reflecting on what all of you have mentioned, Tony mentioned I'm taking his course about the university and kind of its role in past, present, and future, and I think all of you have incredible insights as to what that looks like in your own personal context. And I think one thing that stuck out to me, Katie, when you mentioned your students kind of aligning themselves in the classroom and not necessarily knowing how to do that, I think that's because they haven't had a lot of conversations like this where they get to explore where they actually stand. And Polly, you bring up an amazing point, lived experience and experience that is beyond the traditional classroom. I feel like as a student who's gone through the public education system, it's incredibly undervalued, but I can speak for a lot of my friends out there. We love hearing people's stories. We love hearing about how you got to where you are, why you've included certain parts of your career into what you do now and why you're passionate about certain things. So you all just bring amazing perspectives to this particular prompt. But I want to invite if anyone else wants to add on to this conversation.
Well, I do want to say that Samantha-Lynn is moderating this as extra credit for my class, so you're totally well, you got it. You're doing just fine. But I want to respond to that invitation to be a little bit more autobiographical, because my parents didn't really know how to navigate the U.S. education system. So in many ways, I was figuring it out. And I don't want to say by myself, because I don't think you ever do anything by yourself. I was doing it with my friends, and again, I went to Texas public education, and all of my social studies teachers were football coaches. And not casting any shade on football coaches, but it was not, that's not where I was going to do the learning. I actually, in high school, I was on the debate team. And I don't know if there are any high school debaters out there, but you're just a bunch of nerds, and that's what I was. We would spend our weekends in the library. It's like I was such a nerd that when at home I would watch PBS, I would watch the NewsHour after school, and I would take notes. That was me. I was that kid. It's a little sad, but it's because I was deeply curious, but that's where I got it. And then I had the good fortune that many of my older peers were getting in some very good universities, and they taught me how to do that. They taught me how to apply it. Like these genres of applications, we didn't know. I didn't know how to do that, so they literally would show me their applications. They showed me how to do that, and I went to Stanford for my undergrad, and it was a shock. I learned that there were things called prep schools. My roommate, who I'm still in touch with, he's a lovely person, but his betting was worth more than my dad made in a year. I was not ready for that kind of shock. I was so happy to be there, but I think I spent the first year just being, kind of like looking at these lights. I was just so, so it took me a while to kind of get my feeling that I belonged there. Mm-hmm. And that was a struggle. And then figuring out what I wanted to do was really connected to my own. I realized that I didn't know enough about my own family. And so when I decided late in my university career that I wanted to think more about social movements in Latin America, because I realized that I didn't know my family story. And when I started to ask those questions, I realized that I couldn't understand the history of Latin America without understanding the place of indigenous people in really shaping that region. And I had no preparation in that. And that was an education that I don't think I would have gotten had I not really tried to fill in the blanks that I was seeing at every stage of my education.
For sure. Thank you so much, Tony, for sharing that. I want to encourage anyone else who wants to give another remark for this before we move on to our next prompt. You're all good? Okay, sweet. We'll move on to our next prompt then. So as Katie had alluded towards the beginning of our conversation here, one of the really, really, really popular prompts and questions that we got from our Honors 100 students and our RSVPs, which are out for the public, so we have more than just students in the audience, I can tell you that, is generative AI. Boy, oh boy. Because I feel like we need to talk a little bit more about generative AI, because at the end of the day, the stakes of generative AI are much higher than what a lot of students might assume is like writing my upcoming English paper or solving my computer science homework. So knowing all of you as amazing speakers and knowing the backgrounds of where you are all coming from, I know for a fact that there are thoughts from all disciplines represented here on stage. Some stories to share, or thoughts and insights into how you feel like that'll impact your way of sharing knowledge, or how it acts as a way of knowing, if you even define it as one. So that's an invitation.
Sure, yeah, no, I've been doing a lot of thinking. In the information school, we've been having a lot of conversations about generative AI. My first introduction to generative AI was about this time last year. And I remember I was sitting next to a dad, our kids were taking swimming lessons. and he is also a professor, and he was saying, have you heard of this thing, ChatGPT? And I hadn't, and that was a bit embarrassing because in information school, you would think that we would know early. But he was very concerned about it because he teaches anatomy and physiology, and so he was just worried that the students would be cheating all the time. And then soon enough, everybody was talking about generative AI, and the dominant conversation, at least in the context of K-12 education and the university, was cheating and plagiarism. And you know, this type of conversation, I think, was very reminiscent of earlier conversations that we've had around, for instance, the introduction of calculators. You know, calculators are going to destroy just any sort of mathematical learning and understanding. And of course, now we think of calculators as, you know, just a tool that can allow us to engage in more complex mathematical calculations. We're still trying to figure out what it is that generative AI allows us to do and what does it not. But I think the cheating part and the plagiarism part is sort of, in some ways, clouding this conversation. However, I do think that those concerns are grounded in something really important. I think teachers, professors who are nervous about the plagiarism and will my student be able to write a 5-paragraph essay, I think what they're really concerned about is, you know, how will I know that my student has grappled with the concepts? Because the way we learn is through intellectual struggle. And if you're just getting ChatGPT to write your essay for you, where's the intellectual struggle? And I guess a lot of people stop there and say, well, that's terrible, we need to ban it, because if there's no room for the intellectual struggle, then that's bad. But I think a lot of people, especially here at the University of Washington, there have been some great conversations across campus about ChatGPT and other LLMs that are really trying to ask, okay, well, what new forms of intellectual struggle might we engage in? And I don't know the answer to that yet. And I'm trying to find it. I'm engaging with ChatGPT as much as I can. I'm even paying the subscription for the GPT-4, which is pretty impressive, I have to say. But
Can you share your password?
Oh. You talk to me after this. But you know, I think that, you know, it seems as though, I think this is an invitation, really, this time right now is an invitation for us to rethink what it is that's worth knowing, how we should come to that knowledge, how should we teach it, which is really disconcerting for professors because we often have our syllabi set and the way we're teaching and our learning objectives all set. It's hard for us to part with that, but I think this is a real time for us to rethink what do we want our students to know and be able to do. How, if at all, might ChatGPT play a role in that? I'm excited about these questions. I think that that's one thing that I love about new technologies is they often do destabilize us, and they serve as an invitation for us to really rethink what it is that this whole enterprise of teaching and learning is all about. And so that excites me. What makes me nervous is that every time a new technology is introduced, as wonderful as it may be, there is some way of thinking and being in the world that we give up. And maybe we're okay with that, but I think it's important to really think about it and engage with that in an explicit way. And especially with this technology, it's so easy to outsource so much thinking. I do wonder, and I think a lot about how much of our human agency do we want to outsource? A lot of my research focuses on youth and how they develop a sense of agency, especially in the context of technology. And so with this, I see there's potential, but I also, great potential, but I also see, how easy it is to just sort of go and get your answer and be done with it through ChatGPT. So it's a really uncertain time, full of excitement and also a bit of trepidation.
For sure. Thank you so much for letting us know about that, Katie, especially from your perspective as someone who literally specializes in what's education looking like with technology as technology just continues going. You bring up a good point that while there is a lot of excitement, there is a ton that we have to consider moving forward, especially when it comes to other ways of knowing that AI might not really into. So I think that is something that I'm personally thinking about as a student quite a lot. Like, all the students here are probably wondering, do I use ChatGPT for my next assignment or do I not? But it goes way beyond that, and I think our panel here, we have a really, really good collection of experiences when it comes to maybe those fears or hesitations. So I want to invite anyone here to talk about those, if any come to mind.
I will take the mic. And I blocked all of the secrets with my skirt that made the rustle. So I'm proud. I figured it out. That's where the static is coming from. I think AI, and for me, I'm struggling with the digital divide. It's there, we have it. But I'm struggling with the importance of protecting Indigenous knowledge, sacred knowledge, oral histories, and having things documented or put into the digital realm without permission from the communities and elders. And we've been struggling with that on the written word and it going into a textbook, but this is a little bit different for me, especially when I'm talking to elders who aren't as connected or understanding. They haven't had the experience and the training in social media and in all of the things that we're talking about, so they don't understand where it's going. It's in the cloud. What's the cloud? They're looking up, right? And so for me, it's just being able to respect that historically, when it comes to research, Indigenous and many peoples across the world have been harmed by research in health, in knowledge, in land. And I just question, will that perpetuate and continue that harm? And when do we have the authority and the right to hang on to our knowledge in the ways that we want to hang on to our knowledge and have it used in the way that serves our future generations and our youth? And so for me, I feel like I've got anti-hat on right now. It's like, I don't know if this is a good thing, and you can't have my stories to put into that area and use it for future in that cloud. And so, because I've had aunties say that to me. And so I'm grappling with that myself as an institution who is very well resourced in the digital world. We just came out of COVID, so we're all getting a little savvy with these technologies, and how do we use it for the good, but also to protect.
No, thank you, Paul. I appreciate that, and I appreciate too, Katie, what you said about trying to distinguish the process of education from the products of education. And I really appreciate that. And Polly, the way you're also signaling the dangers of this, I think really resonate, because I have to admit, my first instinct is just the ostrich strategy. Let's pretend it doesn't exist, because I don't understand it, and I usually turn to my 11-year-old for all my technological needs, which usually works. But my first experience with ChatGPT was I'm finishing a book and I needed to get the bibliography in order. And a former student of mine said, "This is ChatGPT is for you. Just ask ChatGPT, put it in Chicago style, and voila." So I did it. ChatGPT thought it would be a great idea to change the names of the people who actually wrote the book. So it was completely useless. I mean, the algorithm, works. It's a sort of a people pleaser. It gives you things that you think you might like, but it wasn't helpful. And so that was a really helpful indication that if you use it, you're often just putting a lot of bad stuff together in really pretty ways. And it's not going to be necessarily reliable. So that was a really useful thing for me to kind of come face to face with. But it also reminds me that I think at the university we need to think about all the ways that, all the forms that knowledge takes. And that's one of the things that we really think a lot about in the comparative history of ideas, is that knowledge takes many forms. So how can we be attentive to how art, or how song, or how landscapes are also ways of thinking about knowledge in ways that are not, you can't generate that stuff. Experience, just deeply paying attention. So those things and finding spaces. I was so sad, the other day I had a student who's in the bio and chemistry kind of track, maybe some of you will confirm this. She was in one of the big Kane classrooms and hundreds of people in. And on the first day of class, the instructor says, in this class, no one raise your hand. There are too many of you, I can't answer your questions. And please, no emails. Which was shocking, that you can have a class with hundreds of people where there's not an opportunity to actually talk about what you learn. So again, don't want to cast shade on bio or chem folks, but there's a scale of learning that feels like it's not really meeting the students at all where they are, and that worries me deeply, and I think this may only aggravate the problem.
Yeah, and I'll add on a couple additional worries, and I think probably you're getting at this, that and I'm sure many of you have given this some thought of just what data is being used to train these models, and where is it coming from, and where is it coming from is one, and have those people given their consent? No. That's very concerning. And a lot of the data is coming just from the internet and chat rooms, and all the biases that we have in those spaces will be, of course, replicated in these models. And so that's something that we should be thinking a lot about. And then, going back to your conversation about our environment, these models take a lot of energy to power. They consume tremendous amounts of natural resources. And so we should really be thinking about that as well. And that relationship between the technology and the environment. So there's a lot to be concerned about, for sure, here. But I also don't want to lose sight of the parts that are exciting.
All of Samantha-Lynn's questions were generated by ChatGPT.
Tony, you're throwing me under the bus today. But I just want to say you all bring really, really good points to the table when it comes to considerations of using technology like this, because it's very relevant to everyone in this room, whether you're hearing about AI for the first time today, surprisingly, or it's been around ever since you've heard of ChatGPT. So I think, given that all of us have just shared our own personal experiences, our own personal bits of knowledge and considerations when it comes to using this, I feel like everyone in the room probably has a better idea of what that choice looks like for them. And as we find out more about technology and do more research and do more asking for, consent of use of data and things like that, we're gonna learn a lot more. I know that for sure.
Yeah, well, I think what I'm excited about is to see how you all the students, find ways, or help us find ways, to elevate human thought. That's what I'm hoping will come out of this. Not to dumb things down and outsource our thinking and our agency, but how might we use and engage with generative AI in a way that can actually bring us to the next level of intellectual struggle? And I don't know what that answer is. I'm trying to figure it out as I engage with, I haven't, the ways I've come up to think of using ChatGPT, I'm not a very good prompt engineer, I guess. So I'm relying on all the students to be creative in that way.
For sure, yeah. And I just want to add on to that, actually. Great prompt there, Katie, since a lot of students are in the audience too. I know it's not just students, but a lot of you are probably thinking of some questions or thinking of some possible suggestions for how we can handle these certain scenarios at hand, like, for example, the AI thing. And this is a little plug as we're going along in this conversation tonight. If you do have any questions, I want to put this out there again. If you go to honors.uw.edu/QA, you can input some questions as they may pop up tonight, and we'll actually be able to address some of them as we head into the Q&A portion of tonight. But before we close out this prompt regarding generative AI and that technological advancement. I want to invite anyone who has any additional thoughts, or I feel like we can move to the next.
You need it, right? Technology.
Yep, there you go. Exactly.
I muted, now I don't know how to do it.
It's a Zoom problem. I like to hear your optimism, though, Katie, that, you know, that this may elevate, because, you know, I'm thinking about what Twitter did for public discourse, and I'm deeply pessimistic.
I mean, yeah, I have a lot of nervousness around this. But then I also think, you know, looking back at history, of course, in each inflection moment, we have lost something, but we've gained something. I'm reading a biography on Leonardo da Vinci right now. He went to an abacus school. You know, I don't think we are bemoaning the fact that we don't use abacuses anymore.
Speak for yourself.
But I'm sure we have given up some skill. You know, and Socrates was just not very happy about the prospect of writing and the loss of memory. But for me, at least, for writing, I mean, that's where I do my best thinking, is through writing. So what will the next best thinking be? It's exciting, but also let's hope it doesn't become Twitter or X.
I've also seen Terminator, and I know how that ends, so.
Yeah, that'll do it. And I think that blends really beautifully into our final prompt for the night, because as a student, this is something I've always been wondering about, especially as someone who really loves integrating all my outside interests, outside of being a biologist and marine biologist. How do we integrate all of these different ways of knowledge into our own lives and into our own journeys as we're growing and learning? Because we have a bunch of 20-something-year-olds in the room, and we just want to understand what that's like. So we would love to know, as students, what can we do to be more inclusive of varied ways of knowledge, and why should we or should we not prioritize different ways of knowledge as we go through our academic career?
I broke it. That's one way of knowing. For me, I would like to ask the students to talk to your elders, to sit down and talk to your parents and your grandparents and ask them, what was their story? What are they doing? I've heard for decades people say, I don't have culture. I don't know. Well, the first step for you is to talk to your grandparents if you still have them, and you are blessed if you do. Talk to your great aunts and uncles, other elders in your communities, and hear their stories on what they lived and experienced, and take that's an education in itself, and apply it to why you are here today. You are sitting in a seat of privilege. You are sitting in a seat on the backs of many that came before you, and you need to understand how come you are able to sit in this seat.
That was very well said, and I love that, you know, asking and listening to your elders. I'm reminded, actually, just about 1 year ago tomorrow, I remember I was sitting with my dad, and I remember because it was my birthday. Tomorrow's my birthday. And
Happy early birthday.
thank you. Won't say how old I'm going to be. But I remember my dad just started talking about when he was younger, and I don't know how we got, but there's on this topic, but he was talking to me about, you know, when he was 13 and 14, and all of these stories that I had never heard of, and it just made me, and I grew up on an island in Bermuda, and that's where he was born as well, and just these stories about what Bermuda was like in the 50s, it sounded so different from when I was growing up in the 80s, and it changed my perspective on my island where I was born and grew up, and where my son was born. And yeah, so I guess the question is, you know, being inclusive and how to keep and value different ways of knowing. And I love, Holly, that you start with your family and the people you know and who are there. Like, there are different ways of knowing so close to you. And I think that's great. One change for me that I've noticed, since we're being invited to be personal, I've noticed that I used to be, especially when I was a student, I used to think, well, the stuff, the thinking that counts and the work that counts is when I'm, writing an assignment or in class. That's what really counts, and that's the way of knowing that I need to spend all my time on. And as I get older, and as a professor, I find that so much of my good thinking, or what I hope is good thinking, comes from not what I'm doing, in my office day to day, but when I go outside of my office and maybe go for a walk, or I read a book, or I stand in front of a piece of art, I actually find that reinvigorates me and helps me to see my work and my research in a new perspective. And sometimes I don't even have to go that far. I just have to change my orientation in my house, like where I'm sitting, and that can help. But I actually, since I became a professor over the last 11 plus years, I think if I see my hours spent working, it's probably less, I would say. It has to be less because I have a child now. They take up a lot of time, funnily enough. But I actually, instead, where I used to, spend my nights doing email and stuff, I actually will instead read fiction, and actually that's much better for my thinking. And I think, it's another way of knowing that I find many connections to my research, and I really value that.
You've already gotten so much good advice here. I don't know how much more I can add. I think one of the things that always helps me is just a sense of humility about how much I don't know all the time, and how much I learn from people every day. And that's, my colleagues, my students, my family, my kid. I actually know a lot more about heavy metal than I've ever known. Thanks to him. Please don't get tickets to Metallica. I need to get them before you do. So, but that humility gave me sort of permission. One of the things about disciplines is that they discipline. They really constrain you in ways where you feel like this is the world. You're going to see it through this lens, and only this lens, because it's the most important lens for whatever you need to do. And there's something that's really harmful when you just think that's it. And opening yourself up to poetry, opening yourself up to literature, opening yourself to art, things that you maybe don't know how to do, is such a good thing to do, just to get out of your comfort zone. I think, we started this evening with the land acknowledgement, and that's important, and that's really terrific. And I love what Polly writes for the Burke's website on how we should really think about the purpose behind those things. But why not also, while you're here at the UW, take classes in American Indian Studies? Think about the specific histories of the various peoples here. We often think about in broad strokes about Indigenous people, and I understand why that is, but each people has a specific history that is really important, and we can't know all of it, but can we ask questions about it? Can we actually think about what the world looks like when we start thinking about the potential for real relationality? And that's a humbling thought, because it requires some work. But I do think there are ways to start here. I think the Burke is actually doing a terrific job in taking an institution that, like the university, the museum is a deeply colonial institution, but yet it can be repurposed for community. It can be repurposed for connection. And finding those ways to kind of use the tools around us to have interesting and new conversations is great. I might also just say a word and plug for literally getting out of your comfort zone, literally going somewhere where you don't know. And in CHID, we have many study abroad programs which also have colonial paths. The idea that certain peoples go certain places, that has a history. But the way we try to do it in CHID is we try to really encourage people to think about how can you go places and establish relations of reciprocity, relations of respect, in ways that you understand what that privilege can do. And I think that that gives you the possibility of really learning in ways that are really deeply meaningful. So as important as your grades are, try to do things that scare you a little bit in ways that are really honest, in ways that really allow you to relate with others.
That's beautifully said. And Polly, do you want to add on to that? Yeah, of course.
I have an ask of you. Put your phones away when you're outside. Look up, listen to the birds, say hello to your fellow students that you're walking past, or your instructors that you're walking past. Build relationship with the human beings or the land around you. Thank you, Tony, for your remembrance. And connect, unplug. Unplug from me.
Amazing. I definitely want to take that advice more, Polly, because boy, oh boy, I'm in the, season where everything's nice, cold, cozy, and I just want to plug my AirPods and just walk to my destination. And I know for a fact that I have friends out here who have fully tried getting my attention while I'm on a walk. And I'm like, I'm so sorry. I just had noise cancellation on and everything. So Polly, you are a genius, and I'm going to take that advice from now on for sure. But all of you have mentioned such impressive and very, very, very relevant information as to how you believe our students should be approaching their learning from this point onward. And Tony, I also want to bring attention to your point about disciplines, because again, coming from someone who has to sit in those cane lecture halls where you're kind of unplugged from everyone, it's not a discussion-based thing. It's really, really hard to engage in communication even. To plug this too, I was just at a previous honors class of mine that I took back when I was a freshman in high school. Shout out to you, Dr. Oliver Fraser out there. And it's all about science communication. And I literally told the students, get out of your comfort zone. I'm going to put you in front of a camera and I want you to explore and see what you can do. How can you talk about your science in a way that other people can engage with and relate to? And a lot of it is through lived experience. What are things that are trends nowadays? What are things that students understand of each other? So I thought that was a really amazing segue. So I feel like all of us are just in tune with each other tonight. And this is not at all scripted at all. This is just literally us having a conversation. So thank you all so much for your amazing points. But yeah, with that said, I think me being as a student and hearing everything that you have all mentioned, I just want to encourage my other fellow students. Many of you might already be in the honors program, or some of you who are not already in the honors program. There is a lot of experimentation that you can do whether or not you're in the interdisciplinary honors program. And that's not really what this talk is about, but I encourage you to really jump out there, take a risk, try something new. Like Tony was mentioning, do some art, do something. Just do something that is not your usual, and you might find your next favorite passion of yours, and find out how you can integrate those things into your work. Because I know, for one, lots of folks really love talking about graphic design and illustration and stuff, and it's really fun that I can still be parts of those conversations, even if I'm trained by trade to be a scientist. So I really appreciate all the points that you brought up tonight. But yeah, I just want to invite everyone before we jump into our Q&A section, if anyone else has any remarks on this particular topic, or we think we're ready. We ready? Okay, amazing. So if that's the case, I'm going to go ahead and invite Stephanie back up to the podium, and we'll jump right into our Q&A. So I want to, first of all, give our speakers a round of applause for that.
Live Q&A. The first one is, what is the role of technological advances in Indigenous communities? Are there positive examples of technology being used for the benefit of Indigenous communities, as well as negative?
That's a good question, and what comes front of mind for me, and it's complicated, but it is the language institutes that are being built within the communities. But it's complicated for me because I don't know my language. I don't know if my tribe's gonna support us doing a language podcast or a language Rosetta or Babel or whatever those resources are. But that's what comes up front of mind to me is the good, right? That language resurrection and teaching.
I might just add, let me take you back to the prehistory, otherwise known as the 1990s. The Sandinista revolution in southern Mexico was really one of the early internet advances. So these were mostly Mayan people in the south of Mexico that on the day that the North American Free Trade Agreement was signed, told the world that they were still there and that this trade agreement was a death sentence. And they did it in incredibly savvy ways. And it was one of the first examples of using this technology to really resonate beyond the borders of their communities, of the nation state, and it was remarkable. So I would also highly recommend Marisa Duarte's book, Network Sovereignty. Marisa is a graduate of DEAI school, and she's currently a professor at Arizona State University. Check out her blog, actually, and her website. She and Miranda Ballard Lewis, who's a faculty member here at DEAI school, along with Claire de la Pampagay, Sandy Littletree, these are tremendous information scientists who are really thinking about that question very actively. So I would recommend all those resources for folks who want to know more about that.
I guess I would just add, while you described yourself as a storyteller, and I do see, especially in my work with youth and technology, it's amazing how young people have really found amazing ways to use technologies to tell their stories, and including stories from many different cultures and contexts, and actually get their voices heard outside of the typical institutional norms. And so I think that's tremendously positive.
I just want to say a couple more recommendations. Podcast. I'm a podcast addict, so I have those earbuds in all the time. I can't. I need an intervention. I can't stop myself. But All My Relations is a great native podcast. The Red Nation is a great podcast. So there's Indigenous people are also using these platforms for their own purposes and their own projects in really powerful ways. And in entertainment and joy. I mean, Reservation Dogs. If you have not seen Reservation Dogs, first, what's wrong with you? But there are so many platforms for native joy as well. If you have a second, go to YouTube and just watch the music video for Redbone's "Come Get Your Love," which is an old song, but there's a relatively new video, which is Indigenous futurism. It's beautiful, it's amazing, and it's impossible to be sad when you listen to that song.
That's wonderful. Okay, this is a deep question. How do you navigate opposing epistemologies about truths in this world, such as scientific knowledge vis-a-vis, for instance, spiritual knowledge?
I show up, and we have the conversation. And it's okay to disagree, and it's okay to share the lived experiences and what we've been taught by all of our instructors, academic instructors, life instructors, land instructors, book instructors. I think they're all valuable in how they make our whole selves. So there is going to be discourse as you go through your journey. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to get upset. You're going to be frustrated, and you're going to find extreme joy when you finally meet the end. And so that discourse is part of that journey, that conflict or that hard conversation you have to have with yourself and with the instructors or with whomever you're engaged with. So just showing up and being able to stay in the conversation and be present to it is really a valuable experience. And the relationship, we were just talking in our class just before I came here about not liking, my brother not liking a farmer as a tribal leader, and he had to, all they said was, "Hello, can we talk?" And then they came up with a water solution in the Yakima Valley. And it's been an amazing environmental project that is happening, that is healing the water, and the farmers are taken care of, and so are the fish. So it's all the learners, right? Thank you.
I think you said that really well, Paul, and also, I mean, just to reference the Zapatistas one more time, one of the important ideas that came out of that rebellion was the dream of a world where many worlds fit. Right? There are many ways of thinking about something, and I don't think it's not a sporting event. It's not about one winning and one losing. It's really trying to understand what opens up when you see the world a particular way. What difference will it make if we think about the land and the water not as resources or things to use, but as relations? What happens when you think about other living beings as relatives? And those are indigenous worldviews, which I'm not saying you need to have, but how does that change the way we can think about where we all live? How can we, one of the great definitions about colonialism is it's a disruption in right relations between relatives. And how can we really think about restoring those relations in ways that are important? How can indigenous epistemologies help us recalibrate our relationship with the world? So the world is not full of things, the world is full of beings. What difference does that make? You don't have to understand all of it's behind it, but these all provide opportunities to really reframe our understandings and really humble ourselves before kind of what's around us. So I think that we don't necessarily have to think about one being right, one being wrong, but they both open things up in different ways. And it's important to say there are so many native scientists, right? There are indigenous scientists who are doing science and also have their creation stories. They're able to hold these things with both hands. And we should be open to that, right? These are, to use a big word, these are kind of some ontological questions. But what happens when we stop thinking about something as property and start thinking about somebody as a relative? Or that it changes everything.
Yeah, I love both of those answers. I think one thing I would just add is that science, when it's at its best, is grounded in humility and doubt and not knowing. And that is very conducive to multiple worldviews, being open to many different worldviews and ways of knowing. And so I love that aspect of science, is that the stance of a scientist is, I don't know, I have no idea, let's test it out and see. And then, I have this knowledge now, but it's shifting always. And, the next question I ask, the next data I collect, it's going to change. And sometimes it changes in really big ways. And so that, I just wanted to add that plug for science and how it can really, I think at its best, it can be expansive.
The next question invites you all to continue with some of the really powerful and important things you've said just now in response to the second question. It's kind of a continuation. This question is there a hierarchy of ways of knowing? How can we challenge and dismantle that? Should we always be seeking the best way of knowing?
I'm going to jump in here for the student perspective, because this, I know for a fact, all of you out there who are also UW students, we all inherently have our own idea. Just being so young and seeing the world for what it is, we are kind of given a hierarchy just from the conversations that we have with each other or the conversations that we see online. So I'm actually I'm going to second this question. I'm not answering it, but I'm just seconding it. I think that it's really important to acknowledge that there's a lot of people in here come into UW and have an idea of, these quote unquote majors are the best ones. And there's some hierarchy that if you're not in STEM, what are you doing? Or you won't get a job if you're not in STEM, which I don't believe. I just want to tell you that right now. But we all kind of come in with this expectation just from what we're seeing. So I'm really curious to hear, just knowing all three of you. What do you guys think about that?
Well, I'll start it off just briefly. I mean, is there a hierarchy? Yes. Look around the campus, you see whose names are in the buildings and those big buildings and what are the best maintained. There's a hierarchy. I also remember someone showing me this comic, I think it was an oatmeal comic, where different disciplines, and it's like the economist is looking down at the political scientist, who's looking down at the sociologist, who's looking down at the psychologist, and it goes on and on. But then, like, way out is the mathematician looking down at everybody else. And it's, you know, it's like there is, even if it's unspoken, there are these hierarchies. Should there be? Absolutely not. And having, as myself as an undergrad, I majored in English. I went to a liberal arts college. I really believe in the liberal arts. And yeah, but it's tricky, and there's so much emphasis on STEM right now. And I'm in an information school, you know, and I know it's really emphasized greatly. And I don't have the answer, you know. Is there? Yes, there's a hierarchy. Should there be? No. How do we bridge those two things? I don't know.
Oh, this is the heart of my work. This is the heart of my journey, really. I think for me, it's, again, building relationships with those in other disciplines. I like the definition of discipline, silos, expertise. I feel that it's important for us to reevaluate the academic and move it into an ecosystem. As we look at the environment, and this is an Indigenous way of knowing, but we all rely on each other to be healthy. And so what Kate was sharing, we all need each other for that philosophy or that story or that change or that solution to happen. We all need to be able to have a conversation and work together. So hierarchy, yes, I've been here for 25 plus years. I'm working on this, and but I'm exhausted, but I do find joy in engaging in conversations with my colleagues. Hi, Melissa. And having these deep conversations about how we support each other's work. It's support in relationship.
I don't know how much more I have to add. I agree with everything that has been said. Yeah, no, of course, there's a hierarchy, as Katie was saying, you know, walk into the computer science building and walk into Bidelford. I mean, it's just not even the same universe. You know, it's just those inequalities are real and they're palpable. And I think I love what you said, Polly, right now. That it's if we think about this ecologically, if we think about how these things might be connected or reconfigured, then things really open up. I mean, one of the things that helped the Center for American Indian and Indigenous Studies really have proof of concept is we were able to come together and get the Mellon Foundation to say, you know what, this is worth investing in. Let's give a few $1 million to this idea. But to do that, those of us who were working in Indigenous studies, we had to understand the logics of the university, the logics of foundations, the language of these hierarchies, because they're navigational, right? These are the things that we help our students get, because in order to change the world, in order to change the system, you have to look deep into the machine and understand how it works. And that's a responsibility. One of the people we're going to be bringing out in the winter is Wayne Yang, who's a scholar at San Diego, and he's written a really terrific book that Samantha-Lynn and others maybe have already read. It's called A Third University is Possible. And one of the things that is implicit in that idea is that we can hack the university. And he gives this great metaphor of, you know, Star Wars, with the Death Star gets blown up. The hero of this story, according to Wayne Yang, is R2-D2. It's this little robot that plugs into the Death Star and is able to blow it up. It's R2-D2 who does it. And the reason R2-D2 is a special droid is not because he's better than the other droids, but because he has a decolonial heart and he has decolonial friends. And he's able to amplify his own agency by understanding how the system works. And Wayne Yang really mobilizes that kind of thinking for how can we use the university for purposes that the university maybe was not designed for.
Wow. We have time for one more question. And this one, I know you guys are going to have wonderful responses for because you've been sharing such wonderful personal anecdotes from your own lives. This question is, can any of you think of experiences you've had where you encountered a new way of knowing that shifted the way you think, the way you work, or the way you live?
Or ending on an intersect.
I think to scale it down to some of the folks who are in the room, especially from the student side of things, I think all of us are kind of posed as students to new ways of knowing all the time when we are faced with conversations like these. We're learning about how to have conversations about new ways of knowing. Simply doing this event is merely a model of that, which kind of ties back into the last question that we were all just talking about. How do we kind of deconstruct these systems, and how do we actually plug into who's around you and have those productive conversations? So I feel like a lot of the students in the room are probably relating to the fact that they might have had a whole new world open up for them just because they're surrounded by so many other people who have had different experiences, in particular, experiences I want to highlight especially, versus them being in their disciplines or their majors. And I think when it comes to adapting to that, I'm a peer educator, so I do Honors 100 work, of course, but I think adapting to the university environment and taking in all of these new things can be really overwhelming. So that's just a basis to kind of build off on, I think, from the student perspective side of things. But if you all have any thoughts on it, go for it.
Maybe I'll start. I have a hard time with the question because I feel like that happens all the time. All the time, right? And I'm having a hard time just thinking about, which time am I going to tell you about?
Well, maybe that's the answer, right? That part of the answer is that it's not about the one time.
Yeah, it's constant.
It's not that that's what it means to be engaged.
Absolutely.
It's to be constantly open.
It is just constantly being and paying attention and noticing all the things that you didn't notice and how the world is different when you put down your phone, when you listen to the birds, when you just think about the world you're in, when you just stop for a second and pay attention, the world does really change. But for me, so much of my education as a scholar happened after my PhD. Like, the PhD was, I think, useful. I read a lot of books, and I learned how to go through a lot of books really fast. And I learned how to write, and I sort of learned how to put things together in particular ways. And that was really valuable. But when I started doing my dissertation work, I was living in indigenous communities in the Andes. And thinking about how community works, I've never been in a more generous place where people, and these were places where by World Bank, IMF standards, poorest places in these countries. And yet people were incredibly generous. And that's not, if you understand how potlatches work in this part of the world, that's not a surprise, right? The idea of collective, the idea of wealth being generosity, the idea that abundance is all around us is transformational. When you just think of all the possibilities of wind power and solar power, those things are incredibly abundant. And yet we're always in these scarcity models. So a lot of indigenous forms of thinking just really literally changed the way that I think about what's possible. And one other quick, Kyle White, who's an indigenous philosopher, environmental justice scholar, he has, and other scholars talk about this as well, Polly also talks about this as well, that this moment of apocalypse forgets that Native peoples have been through the apocalypse multiple times. And they take a very long view of things. So there's different scales that we can think about where we are and where we can. So I'll stop.
Yeah, I agree, Tony. This is why I'm struggling with this question, is because it's all the time. And then I think actually going to college and then graduate school, that's you don't do the learning there. You learn how to be open to learning in the future, and of course we do some learning along the way. But I think that's what being an undergrad prepared me to be open to new experiences and new ways of thinking. And I think when you were reading that question, Stephanie, I was thinking this time and this time and this time. I think the most recent time where and it's ongoing every day, that I have my ways of knowing challenged is being a parent. And all of a sudden, my 6-year-old, really since he was starting to talk, was questioning, the way I saw the world and the way I thought that the day should go. And all of a sudden, I have to come up with a reason why he should put his fork and knife together after he's finished with the meal, and the reason why wash his hair twice a week, and I'm thinking, why is that? Is it just because that's what my mother told me to do? And but it can get really philosophical with a 6-year-old.
That's a very great question. I think, can you repeat the question?
Yes, but I have to open up another screen first. The question, I think I can remember. The question was, can you think of a particular experience that changed, a new way of knowing that you encountered that really changed the way you live, the way you work?
Okay, yes, I have one, and it just happened the other day, and that is, it's rinse and repeat, people. It's rinse and repeat. We have a family from the Wanapum tribe that the chief, the father of the family, is our elder, was our chair for many, many years, over 30 years. He passed away. We took our time for our mourning, and we came out of our mourning time, which is a year later, and the family came over, asked them to come over, and we had a service. And it's been a very, it's a relationship of joy, it's a relationship of hurt, it's a relationship that goes back to joy, it's a relationship of teaching, of remembering, of rinse and repeat. And when the family came over and we had the memorial, there was still a lot of hurt. On Monday, the family came again. And the mother, the matriarch, she got to witness her children taking on the role and responsibility of their father. So this is intergenerational. And I've seen this. And it's a new way of learning for me. It was a new experience for me to watch her move from her hurt, to watch her heal through this process of visit, talking to the scientists, trying to understand the language that they're using in paleobotany and in just some other conversations that we had, and the kid that my relatives asking the hard questions, right? I don't understand, I need more information. And watching our elder walk through those steps, and at the end, she was giggling, hugging me with both arms. We had fully healed, and this is an old relationship, but it was new for me on Monday. That brought such amazing joy, and that way of knowing and that relationship that was transferred that entire day was magic. It was healing for me as well. And I hope you understood that story. If not, you need to think about it.
Thank you. And thank you, audience, for these very wonderful questions. Now I'm going to invite Samantha-Lynn, Tony, Katie, and Polly to each reflect for a moment on the conversation you've had tonight, and to share with us, what are you taking away and what do you hope the audience will take away and will know as we close out?
Yeah, I can jump into this one here, but just first of all, thank you all so much for sharing all of your amazing insights across all your disciplines and everything. I think as a student, and I'm saying this for a lot of my other fellow students in here, I'm coming away from this conversation with a lot of excitement and a lot of hope, because for me personally, this conversation has unified so many of the different realms of interest for me, because I do research at the Burke Museum, for example, but how do I integrate that with like my Filipino heritage? How is that going to inform the way that I interact with academic spaces moving forward? And it's been hitting every single one of our different departments kind of represented here on screen. But I think that there's just so much excitement, at least in my heart, because now I have a ton of friends, family, and colleagues here that see a conversation happening in real time, and now they have a model of how they can tap in and listen to their peers, even if they're not within their discipline or not within their area of knowledge. And I think since we had such a broad topic of ways of knowing, it's big, it's scary, but at the same time, it encourages us to, again, get uncomfortable and be okay with not being comfortable, and just being there to listen and respond and be there as yourself and bring what you can to the table. So yeah, that's how I feel about this conversation, but I invite all of you to share your thoughts too.
I guess we'll just go down the line. I'm taking away at least 3 things from Paul and this the importance of intergenerational conversations, really listening to the elders, and maybe the flip side of that is Katie's. You should think like a 6-year-old. You should ask why. You should constantly look around and think as you go around campus, even some remarkably simple questions. Think about the names of these buildings. Who is Herbert Cowan? What is this artwork that's on the walls? Like, if you just stop and ask questions about literally where you are, things open up. Sometimes unsettling things, and things that you can take to learn about how we got here, but also how the world can be different. I think that, I think in lots of our classes we learn really depressing things, but we don't do it to depress you. We really do it to kind of give you a sense of how we got to this place, but then also how the world could be otherwise. So I think thinking like a 6-year-old can be helpful.
I think for me, I'm really taking away, I think the concept of openness has come up a few times this evening, and just how important it is for us to be open to different experiences, different viewpoints, different ways of knowing. And the openness, I think, also implies an openness to engaging with these hard questions. When we're talking about generative AI, we need to be actively engaging in these questions, because if we don't, someone else is going to decide for us what the future will look like. And yeah, so the openness implies an engagement, which I really think is so important, because it's a way for us to maintain our agency. And then I think, the idea of humility has really come across, and just knowing that we don't know it all, and that's okay, and there's excitement in that. But walking around and asking it, like, what's around me and why is it here? That requires a certain humility that you don't know all the answers yet. And so that's what I'm going to try and bring into the next little while, is an openness and humility and a readiness to engage.
I'm coming back to the old story about the creation story of the click-a-tap basket, around the young girl who didn't have something to contribute to her village. And I'm gonna cut this to 2 minutes. She took off from the village because she couldn't find a place to be in the community. And she wandered off and she sat down under grandfather's cedar. Grandfather Cedar asked her what was wrong. She wanted something to do. You young scholars, you are on this journey. So as he sat there, he instructed her how to tend a root and how to start to make a basket. He also said you have to take the test. Take it down to the water and dip it. And if it holds the water, you have completed your work. She took it down, dipped it, water went through it. She was upset. You're upset when you fail a test. He said, take this root, start that process again. She does. And she gets going and she gets the base of the basket. And he says, now pack your things and start walking and see what happens. And as she went, she met many mentors. She met salmon, mountains, bear, horse. She met rattlesnake. And on those journeys, they said, weave this design into your basket. This is what I've taught you. When she was done, when she felt she was done, she finished the top. She came back to Grandfather Cedar, and said, here's my basket. And he says, what have you learned on your journey? She shares all of these things, all of these different things. He says, now you do the test. Take it to the water. She takes it to the water, she dips it, she raises it up. No water comes through. He says, you are now a basket weaver. You have a skill to take back to your community, and it's time for you to go home. You are making your basket. You are building that knowledge. You are establishing and identifying your place and what you're going to give back to society. I wish you luck and goodness and love on that journey. So remember those mentors and weave those lessons, those conversations, weave them into your knowledge base, into your basket. Put your phones away, say hello, and connect. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, I am going to invite my dear colleague, Ed Taylor, to the stage because Ed is going to give us some closing remarks to bring the evening, wrap it all up for us.
Good evening. Good evening. My job is simple and enjoyable. My job is just to pay attention and listen to such brilliance and pay attention to the smallest of things as you've invoked us to do. And then at the end of the evening, to just go home and lay down and rest and reflect on that which I've heard. I don't sleep well at night these days. I don't sleep well at night when there's so much suffering in the world, and there is a great deal of suffering. So sometimes I lie awake and I try to draw on things that make me smile, things that feel good. And it's a wonderful thing to work in a university because there is so much. And the first thing I noticed as I was walking in the room was who was in the room. How many students are in the room? I watched you walk in. Now look at the number of hands in the room. Now one of the things I noticed was as you were walking in, you know what's going on upstairs? There's a 70s disco party going on upstairs with about 300 students in it, and you all walked here to a conversation about ways of knowing. Let's applaud that. You walked past the disco party to get here. That says something about you. It really does. There are families in the room. Samantha, your father is in the room, is he not? Can you wave? You should be so proud. Can you just stand up? It's worth standing up. Because as we talk about wisdom and knowledge and how we got here, the father was here. And Samantha, biologist and artist and leader with a fan base. and Tony, crossing borders, public educated, learning and unlearning, listening to podcasts, addicted to podcasts. I listen to many scholars and academics. Very few are bold enough to invoke Redbone. Come and get your love. Come and get your love. I will lay down tonight and Redbone will be in my head. Come and get your love. Katie, 12 years on this journey, dreamed of being a teacher and writer, and you are. From one classroom to another, you are here. Polly, Yakama Nation, diversity, access, inclusion, non-traditional academics. In some way, you're all non-traditional academics, aren't you? Awaken those ancestors who have been rendered asleep. You call them to be awake and be here with us. So I'll lay down tonight and think a bit about what I've learned from you. We can love where we are and be ambivalent at the same time. That's an invitation to push. It's an invitation to push, and we ought to be pushing. What do we bring into this space? If you stand and move, do you see things differently? If you kneel and reflect, or if you stand, if you move your feet and reflect, if you turn to the east to pray, does wisdom come to you? Does knowledge come to you? What does your past teach you? What does my past teach me? What does this moment teach us? We're three-dimensional. What does our past teach us? What does the current moment teach us? And what does the future hold for us? Have you heard of ChatGPT? What should we do? Is this your essay? Is it really your essay? No, is it your essay? What will you hold? What knowledge will you produce? Or what will be outsourced? What will you allow to be outsourced? What knowledge will you predict? Will our elders bless us as we go into the cloud? Can we find wisdom in the cloud? Yes, ChatGPT is here. Your education should invite you, I've learned, to dance, to paint, to imagine, to compose, to create, and sustain. We need your energy to bring us to the next level. We need wisdom. Grandma, auntie, grandpa, tell me your story. Tell me who you are. Tell me how you got here. Tell me how I got here. Grandma, what knowledge is in your cloud? We need humility. We need relationality. We need to ground ourselves in humility. This should all humble us. This moment should humble us. What scares you? What scares you the most? What keeps you up at night? And whatever that is, invite that to be closer to you. Invite it in. Do something. Jump out there. My love, my friends, the hierarchy of knowledge is the old way. Perhaps the hierarchy of pain, who suffers most, is the old way. We shall not let our hearts grow numb to pain and suffering of others. We must not shut down our humanity. The starting point is set the phone down and just walk and see each other. Interconnectedness. I take from you, our panel, what does it mean to be educated? And what does it call us to be? What does an empathic heart call us to know? When we sleep at night, can we dream of a world where many worldviews flourish? Can we amplify our agency? Can we walk and move around and maneuver through and see the world with a 6-year-old mind and just simply ask why? Just simply ask why. Can we think like 6-year-olds and spend time just looking at the clouds that will bring us rain, the clouds that will bring us knowledge, the clouds that will carry our ancestors' voices with us, and wonder and laugh again and find joy and peace. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, students and families and veterans. Tomorrow is Veterans Day. We have veterans in the room. And applause for our veterans as well. And know that it's moments like this and evenings like this that should give you hope, that should allow you to lay your head down at night and rest and imagine a world that is different. And artificial intelligence will not get us there. It will be your heart and it will be your soul and your imagination. One more applause for our panel for your words. And thank you for telling your stories. One of the most wonderful things about being at this university is we have brilliant, brilliant people who stand up and tell their stories and talk of family and talk of how they got here and speak their narrative, and that's what inspires me the most. So thank you all and congratulations.